Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello, my name is Himanshu Tyagi. I will be taking this course on heat and mass transfer, and today we will be looking at the first lecture of this course, which is titled Introduction. I will begin this course with a brief course outline. There will be around 40 lectures that will be covered in this particular course. The target audience is undergraduate students. Typically it is second year and third year BTech students. In addition, some working professionals can also benefit by taking this course, those that have joined the industry after doing diploma. And in addition, anyone who wants to learn more about heat and mass transfer will greatly benefit by taking this course. There are some standard textbooks that are mentioned over here. Let's take some examples from our daily lives. So this occurred to me yesterday. I've been taking some medicines, as I can show over here. And these are essentially because I have got some pain, and doctor told me that there is deficiency of calcium and vitamin D in my body. So then I took the photograph of these medicines, and let's see what it says on the back side. So I think it is highlighted, and I have mentioned it over here again. It says store protected from light and moisture at a temperature not exceeding 30 degrees centigrade. Let's look at the second one. Here also it mentions a similar line. It says store in a cool, dark, dry and dark place below 25 degrees centigrade. So both of these medicines essentially tell us about them being stored at low temperature. And we are also familiar that in our daily lives we like to store food at low temperature, otherwise it gets spoiled. So essentially some chemical or biological reactions take place at a particular temperature. So then as engineers, especially as heat transfer engineers, this question comes in our mind that how do we maintain temperatures below 25 degree or 30 degree, especially in a summer like this one, where the outside temperature is pretty high. As we are seeing in news lately, the temperature in northern India is going around 45 degree, even 48 degrees some places. So we are all familiar with certain equipments which are available and which help us do that. So there are many ways in which we can do it. For instance, as shown in the photograph over here, we can purchase a simple refrigerator which allows us to maintain a cold temperature inside this particular space. We can in fact cool the whole room, like the studio in which I am present currently. It has a lot of air conditioning working inside. So I think the ambient temperature is pretty pleasant, around 25 or 30 degrees centigrade. Few years back, air conditioning was not that prevalent. So in those times, people used to use evaporative cooling. So these are some of the techniques, some of the ways in which we can achieve cooling, and these are some of the equipment. So if we ask a couple of questions, the first question we ask is, what is the common thing among all these equipment? So the answer that I like to propose is, there are many common things, but the main thing which is common between them is they are all equipment which deal with heat and mass transfer. What are other things which is common between them? They all run on electricity. So if we have a refrigerator, evaporative cooler or a desert cooler or air conditioner, all of them operate on electricity. Now we ask another set of questions, that today how do we generate most of our electricity? So we know that most of our electricity actually comes from thermal power plant. These could be coal fired, nuclear based, gas fired, oil fired, different type of thermal energy which is used to generate electricity. If you look at the scenario, so the point I am trying to make over here is there are so many applications related to heat and mass transfer. There are many equipments inside the thermal power plant, starting from the boiler, the condenser, the boiler feed pump, turbines, where essentially steam at very high temperature and pressure operate. So it's very important for an engineer to figure out how to optimize the thermodynamics as well as the heat transfer. If we project in future and ask this question, that today we are getting most of electricity from thermal power plants, but what is going to happen in future? So, the trend it looks like most likely we will be using solar photovoltaics, and this trend has already started, and in future it is going to pick up, and more share of electricity is going to come from solar photovoltaic. So, the question can also come in our mind that perhaps heat transfer is not that important in solar photovoltaic. But as we can see in the graph shown over here, temperature actually has a very huge effect on the performance of solar photovoltaics. This is because solar photovoltaics are made of semiconductor, and if you look at the temperature over here and temperature over here, so if the temperature of the panel increases, so the corresponding voltage, current, or essentially the power output, it actually goes down. So, there is a substantial decrease in the power output. So, even if we shift for generating electricity from thermal power plants towards solar photovoltaic, it is expected that heat transfer would still continue to play a huge role over there as well. And if you look at many of the electronic components that are all across us, including laptops, desktop, mobile phones, most of them, they have certain aspects of heat transfer going on. So, let us see in this particular slide, it shows a photograph of a CPU, and we can clearly see a fan which is installed on the top over here. So, we see a fan that is clearly identifiable from this photograph. The CPU or the chip actually lies beneath over here, and that is where lot of heating is taking place, and that heating is essentially because of I square R law. And what we see in between over here is a huge heat sink. So, these are things that we are going to study in this particular course, where we are going to look at concepts of transferring heat from one surface to another and then essentially dissipating it. So, what we are seeing in this particular example is that the heat is being generated in the CPU. This is where a lot of wattage is being produced in terms of heat. That heat is then uniformly spread and transported through the heat sink, and ultimately from the top surface of the heat sink over here. So, what we are seeing essentially, we will study in later chapters on heat conduction as well as convection. So, these surfaces over here are essentially extended surfaces, and one of the examples of them are fins. So, in this photograph we have another set of fins which are shown over here. So, usually these are made of very high conducting material like copper or aluminum, and they allow the heat to travel, and essentially at the other surface where the fan is present, then through convective heat transfer the heat is then lost. So, this is something, if we open our CPU or a desktop computer, if we open it, then this is something that we see inside over there. Now, even inside laptops, we see a different type of fan which is present. At the bottom of the laptop, we see this kind of a grid structure which allows the passage of air. So, this fan essentially takes in air, tries to cool the CPU, which also has a heat pipe inside in the laptop, and after that, that heated air is allowed to come out from these grids over here. And on the right hand side, we can see over here that even in LEDs, the dissipation of heat is a very important factor. So, we see a very big LED bulb over here. If you open it up, then we see essentially it is made up of small LED bulbs component which combined together give that high luminosity. So, essentially all equipments which generate heat, it requires it to be dissipated, otherwise the device can fail, it can lead to melting and other catastrophes. Now, let us, having looked at all these electronic equipments, another question which comes in our mind, that we as human beings, our body need to be maintained in a very narrow temperature range. As shown on the slide over here, it says that the temperature needs to be maintained between 35.5 and 37.5 degrees centigrade. So, it is a very narrow range, let us say 1 degree centigrade or about 1.5 or 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's very amazing that nature has created the thermal regulatory mechanism inside our body. So, our body consists of about 60% water, and there is a natural thermal regulatory system inside the body that when the core temperature starts to go high, when the temperature of the body tries to increase, then automatically perspiration takes place, which creates some sort of evaporation on the surface. So, we will see some sweat appear on the skin. Then if some air is blowing on top of it, or if we are sitting inside the fan, then evaporative cooling takes care of that. So, the body is able to dissipate heat. On the other hand, if the body is experiencing a dip in the core temperature, then natural shivering takes place inside the body. So, the muscles start to contract, they give some shivering effect, and there it tries to generate some heat. Historically, if we look at this particular slide over here, so human beings have been using heat transfer mechanisms. For instance, fire was invented or discovered long time back, and then people started using it for doing cooking and even for foundry, because they wanted to use metals and make lot of utensils and weapons out of that. Even water is being used as a thermal, very good thermal fluid. So, as is shown in the table over here, if you try and compare that very narrow 1 degree temperature range which our body operates in, and if we compare it with the vast range in which nature operates. So, we see very low temperatures for oxygen boiling point, which is about minus 180 degree centigrade. Then water freezes at 0 degree centigrade, water boils at 100 degree centigrade. Silver melting point is 962 degree centigrade, and certain more temperatures are mentioned over here. One interesting thing that we see, the temperature plays a very important role across the nature, and most of the properties like thermal properties, chemical, mechanical, even magnetic properties, optical properties of material are actually dependent on temperature. So, as shown in this particular table over here, so most of these properties are actually temperature dependent. So, we see we have pressure over here, volume, density, specific heat, thermal conductivity, thermal diffusivity, heat transfer coefficient, Nusselt number, Prandtl number, thermal expansion, emissivity, absorptivity and reflectivity, and so on. So, we also have for ideal gas root mean square velocity. Then for fluids we have dynamic and kinetic viscosity. Then we have surface tension and the shear stress. And of course, the phases that we see objects in, for instance, if we see water as frozen in the form of ice, we see it liquid or in vapor form. So, temperature plays a very important role over there. So, these slides were presented mainly to illustrate the importance of temperature and heat and mass transfer. Now, let me go back into the content of the course, and I will explain very briefly that what are the areas that we are going to cover in this course. So, again we ask another question in order to answer this, that what are the various modes of heat transfer. So, I think most of us have some basic understanding behind it. So, there are predominantly 3 modes of heat transfer. We will start with conduction, and that equation is written over here in a simpler form. Then we will go on to convection, which is mentioned over here. And later on we will go into radiation. So, this is the third important mode of heat transfer. In addition to this, we will also study mass transfer towards the end of the course, and 2 application oriented chapters we will also look at. The first one is boiling and condensation, and the second one is heat exchanger. So, with this we will cover most of the topics related to heat and mass transfer in this undergraduate level course. Now, let us try and see. So, we will go ahead and look at the first mode of heat transfer, and today is the introductory lecture. So, what I am going to do is cover it with the very basics, and most of this thing I will start formally from the next lecture onwards. I will start with one dimensional heat conduction equation. So, if we will try and see what is the introduction behind the conduction heat transfer. So, we start simply with heat transfer, and we will convert it into heat transfer rate, and the units for heat transfer is given over here in joules. And if we put a dot on top of Q, that implies the rate of heat transfer, and then the unit for this particular thing is watts, which is essentially joules per second. So why am I starting with this equation? Because this is a very basic equation. We have all studied it in high school level, and it essentially says Q equals to m Cp delta T. So if let's say I want to heat a given mass of water, and let's say I have a known amount of water, it could be 10 kgs in this particular case. I also know the specific heat of water, that value I know. And I want to figure out if I want to raise the temperature of this particular water, like we used to do in winter times if we want to take bath. So early in the morning, let us say the temperature is 5 degrees, and finally I want to heat it to a more pleasant temperature of, let's say, 45 degrees, because I want to take bath in slightly lukewarm water during the winters. So if I know these particular values, then based on this, by using this particular equation, I can figure out how many joules, or the same thing can also be written in kilowatt hours. And this of course is important because this is going to become the unit of electricity. So people can always convert this. So this is 1 unit of electricity, and this converts into rupees. So I can figure out how much would be my electricity bill if I want to heat a certain amount of water, in this particular case 10 kgs, from a lower temperature to a higher temperature. So this equation enables us to figure out what is the amount of heat that needs to be transferred in order to heat this particular fluid from a low temperature to high temperature. Now, what is the role of heat transfer rate, which is this Q dot symbol over here? Let us say I figure out that the amount of heat which I need is about 10 megajoules. Now, if I want to heat that particular thing in a very short amount of time, let us say in 10 seconds, so these variables allow me to calculate the rate of heat transfer which needs to be carried out. So in this particular case, I can figure out it will be 10 megajoules divided by 10 seconds, which gives me 1 megawatt. So of course this number is very high. In real life we don't achieve these things in our homes, but in power plants and very big installations these numbers are actually achieved. So this is the basic thermodynamics behind the definition of heat transfer and the rate of heat transfer. Now let us go ahead and apply it for the first mode of heat transfer, which is conduction heat transfer. So we are focusing on this equation given on the left side over here. So this equation states Q dot conduction is equals to minus Ka dt by dx. So this K over here stands for thermal conductivity. And this we are going to formally define in the next lecture. Over here I am just using an example to illustrate this particular point. So essentially what this equation tells us is that the rate of heat transfer in conduction heat transfer is proportional to the temperature gradient, which is del T by del x. In other words, the difference in temperature divided by the distance across which is taking place. So I can write del T by del x as this in an approximate sense. It is also proportional to A. If the cross-sectional area is large, then the amount of heat which can transfer, the rate at which it will transfer is also very large. And K is a proportionality constant. So historically this equation has been known as the Fourier's law of heat conduction. And Fourier was a gentleman in France around 200 years back. So this equation is attributed to him. If you look beneath over here, we have also defined one more variable, which is Q dot, which is the heat flux, which is also an easy parameter to understand. This essentially tells us that Q dot is equals to capital Q dot divided by A. So essentially in terms of its units, it turns out to be watts per meter square. So just to illustrate this particular concept, I wanted to start with one example. So, this is a solid example that I will start with, and this we can see happening taking place all around us. So, for this I will illustrate one small point. So, let us say we have a very large wall which is shown in this particular example over here. Okay. So, we have a large wall which I will illustrate with this particular example over here. So, let us say this is the height of the wall, this is the width of the wall, and we have a small thickness of the wall like this. So, essentially what we are going to do is we are going to assume one dimensional heat transfer, and what we are going to do is to try to figure out how much heat is actually conducting through this particular wall. And this example is significant because it is one of the simplest examples with which we can understand heat conduction, and it is kind of taking place all around us. If you look at any exterior wall of a building, this kind of scenario takes place where if the wall separates the inside from the outside, so the outside temperature is quite large, inside temperature is quite low. So, during some assumptions, during the steady state conditions, we can apply the one dimensional heat conduction equation. So, those details will come very soon. It can also be applied on top of on the roof. So, for example, the top surface of the roof, especially in summers, becomes very hot, and heat starts conducting through the roof through a particular thickness, and the interior temperature is usually not that large. So, heat transfers takes place from the higher temperature side to the lower temperature side, which is what I am going to illustrate with this example over here. So, now we come back to the slide, and this is the schematic that I was talking about over here. So, I have prepared certain numbers that I am going to put over here. So, I am going to make certain assumptions. So, just for illustration point, I am going to assume some round numbers, like the height of the wall is about 5 meters, the width of the wall is about 4 meters, and the thickness of the wall, which is given as L, I am going to take it as a small number. So, in this particular case, let us assume it is about 6 inches thick, which is about 15 centimeters, and which in turn is about, I can convert it into meters, 0.15 meters. So, what I am going to do is I am going to make certain assumptions, and the first assumption that I will make, it is a one dimensional heat conduction. And the second thing is I am going to assume it is steady heat conduction. So, do not be afraid that if you are not able to understand some of these parts, because these are some of the things I am just showing little bit in advance, and all these things I will define in the next lecture onwards. Today I am just giving an illustration of different examples of heat transfer. So, what I am going to do is I am going to draw the cross section of this particular wall. So, what I am going and drawing is this particular section that I am zooming in over here. So, this thickness I can represent as L over here, and this L is, of course, I have defined on the bottom right as 15 centimeters. Also define the x axis over here, because very soon we are going to become very mathematical oriented, and there it is very important to define all these parameters closely. So, I am going to assume this side is the exterior side. So, the outdoor temperature I am going to assume is quite high. Let us say in summer it is about 40 degrees, and this side, on the opposite side, I am going to assume is the interior, and the indoor temperature I am going to assume is slightly comfortable, 20 degrees centigrade. So, if I come back over here, what I have done is I have defined these temperatures over here. So, for simplicity I will call the left side temperature as T1, which is the exterior temperature given as 40 degrees centigrade. The right hand side temperature, for simplicity, I will define as T2, which is given as 20 degrees centigrade. So, what we will see in future lectures is essentially the temperature profile inside this wall appears like this. So, I have not drawn it very nicely, but in reality it is actually a linear slope. So, what you see is you just join T1 and T2 points together with a perfectly straight line. I could not draw it very well, but I think you get the picture over here. So, this shows that the temperature we can figure out at the middle point over here. So, this temperature is going to be exactly half of the sum of these two temperatures. So, between 40 and 20 degrees centigrade, we will achieve 30 degrees in the middle of the wall. So, what I want to do now is figure out the value of heat transfer rate which is taking across over here. So, let us first see what is the direction of heat transfer which is taking place over here. So, clearly heat flow takes place from high temperature to low temperature. So, this is the direction in which it is taking place, and later on we will figure out that because this is also the positive x direction, whatever number that we will get at the end, it is going to be a positive number, because the positive x direction if heat flow is taking place, whatever number I will get, let us say I get 20 watts or 200 watts. So, there will be a positive sign in front of that, because this green arrow over here is in a line with the x direction over here. So, this is a very important understanding. Now, let me go ahead and try and solve this particular equation. So, what I see is I get Q conduction is equals to K A. In this case, I can write, because it is a linear slope, it is T1 minus T2 divided by L. Now, the question comes, A I can calculate very easily. So, let me go ahead and write the easy stuff down before. So, A is the cross sectional area, as you can see in this particular curve over here. If I ask you a question, what is the value of A, I think you will be very easily able to answer that it is simply the product of these two lengths. So, it is essentially the height multiplied by the width, and if I take these numbers over here 5 meter and 4 meter and I do this product, essentially what I am getting is 20 meters square. So, this is the easy part, and the other easy part is T1 value is known to me 40 degrees, T2 value is also known to me, this is 20 degrees, and the length value is also known to me, which is 0.15 meters. So, the only unknown in this particular equation on the right side is K. So, this again is something that we will figure out in the next lecture. So, what we are trying to figure out now is how will we know the value of K. So, in this particular case, if we go back to the slide, essentially K is a material property, and again this is something we will look at in detail in the next lecture onwards. So, just have little bit patience. So, next lecture we will explain how does the K value change for different solids, liquids and gases. So, if we go back to the slide, what we are seeing is essentially this K value is for the brick wall. So, if I know the material that is inside this particular wall, and I can look up in a table. So, this is something which I already did, and it is usually given in some standard textbooks. So, the K value we can approximate for brick as about 1 watts per meter Kelvin. And this is a very interesting thing, because it allows me to play around with the K value in order to achieve the desired Q dot value. So, this is a point I will illustrate in just a minute. So, we go back to this particular equation, and now I plug in all these values together. So, let me try and do it neatly if it is possible. So, I am taking 1 multiplied by the area, which is 20, multiplied by the temperature difference, which is 40 minus 20, divided by 0.15, and this whole thing will turn out to be in the units of watts. So, I have already pre-done this calculation, and it turns out, if my calculation is correct, we will get something like 2666.66 watts, and in short notation I can approximate it as 2.7 kilowatts. So, this example illustrates a few things. One is that we have been able to apply the Fourier's equation for a very simple case. So, in this case we have one dimensional heat conduction and everything is at steady state. We have assumed certain dimensions inside over here, and we have assumed certain material properties. For example, the brick value we have assumed for thermal conductivity, and we have done kind of a very rough calculation to figure out that if we have a large wall with a huge temperature difference, how much heat is actually coming through it. Now, let me also do one thing. Let us try and make sense of this number. So, we will remember this number for a little while. I will pull up a blank slide. So, the number that I want you to remember was 2.7 kilowatt, and remember this is across this particular wall over here, and it's a tall wall, 5 meter tall, 4 meter wide. So it's really a large wall. And let's try and see what does this number represent. How big is actually this number? So I'll define it in some. I'll try to define it in certain ways. So if I compare it with the horsepower, so 1 horsepower is approximately 746 watts, which means I can convert 2.7 kilowatts, and what I'll get is approximately 3.57 horsepower. So power I have converted into another unit, into horsepower. And let me give a physical context of this. Most of the scooters which are having the small size engine in India, so these scooters have about 6 to 7 horsepower. Now the only thing that we have to be aware of is that this horsepower which we are available from scooters is actually in the form of mechanical energy, whereas what we have calculated 2.7 kilowatt is in the form of thermal energy. So this thing we have to keep in mind. Numerically both are similar, both are same, sorry, not these two, but 2.7 kilowatt and 3.57 horsepower. But in reality, what we will see in terms of the thermal equivalence, this is 2.7 kilowatt of thermal energy or thermal power, and this is 3.57 horsepower of mechanical power. Is there another way we can try and get a physical significance of 2.7 kilowatt in terms of heat, and over there if we can convert it into tons of cooling? So we have seen air conditioning all around us, and we have heard that a particular air conditioning is 1 ton or 1.5 ton or 2 ton. So I have pulled out that particular number. So we can see that roughly speaking 1 ton of refrigeration is about 3.5 kilowatt. And using this number over here, now I can convert the energy which was going through our wall. If we do the rough calculation, it turns out it is about equivalent to 0.76 tons of cooling. So what it essentially means is, if I have a very hot outdoor over here, 40 degrees, and I have a cold indoor over here. Now the question which comes is, mathematically I have solved it if I know these values. Physically, how will I achieve cold temperature inside when hot temperature is outside? So the answer comes from this number over here. That we didn't mention, that over here inside the wall or inside the house, there has to be an air conditioner which is actually cooling the space down, and that air conditioner requirement we have kind of calculated that its cooling load should minimum be 0.76 ton. So if you look at it from the comparison in market, it's actually a small number, because usually the AC start from 1 ton, 1.5 or 2 ton, but we must keep in mind this is just one side of the wall. So if we have walls on many sides and on the roof, and all that heat is actually coming in, if we add all that together, that number could be very high. So this is a very simple example that I took, but I just wanted to illustrate and it with the real life values and try and see that how does the heat transfer from taking place across the wall, it compares with our real life understanding. I'll try to do the same thing with the next mode of heat transfer, which is convection heat transfer, and it is given with this particular equation over here, as you can see. So convective heat transfer is a different mode of heat transfer than conduction. Over here the flow of liquid, it transports the heat away from the heated surface, and again more details we will look at in future lectures. And this particular equation is attributed to Newton, and it is called as the Newton's law of cooling. So what are some of the things which are given over here? Let me go ahead and explain it briefly. The value of H which is given over here, let me see if I have in my slide. So this is the convective heat transfer coefficient, and its units are watts per meter square Kelvin. A is of course the surface area which is in contact with the fluid. Ts is the surface temperature, and T infinity is the fluid temperature. So I'll write that over there. This is the fluid temperature, this is the surface temperature, and A is the surface area. So, what we see is essentially we can apply this equation like we did in conduction case. If we know the value of Ts, T infinity, A and H, we can club them together and calculate the value of Q. Now, let us see in real life example. I will take one example over here and try that we get. So, I will skip to a new slide over here and let me go ahead and try and see one example for convection. So, one of the typical examples which require cooling through the mode of convection is if we have a hot metal ball over here and that I want to very rapidly cool. So, I want to cool this ball which is at a high temperature. So, let me assume this ball is made of copper and it has a high temperature. Let me assume it is about 80 degrees centigrade. I can allow it to cool in air, but our calculations will show later on. Again, I am jumping ahead a little bit. I just want to give you a little feel of how things will work out. So, if this is my temperature over here, this is Ts, surface temperature initial, which is 80 degrees in my example, and I have oil over here inside the tank, and I will write its temperature T infinity. I will take it to be slightly lower. So, in summers our fluid temperature is about 30 degrees. So, over here we have T infinity which is equals to 30 degrees. So, let me draw this line over here. Oops, sorry. So, now what will happen if I did not dip this copper ball and just allowed it to cool in air is that it will lose heat, its temperature will gradually reduce, but it will be very, very slow. So, what we are going to see is something like this. So, even after a long period of time the temperature has not reduced. So, what we want to achieve is something like this. So, that in relatively less amount of time, maybe 100 seconds, I want to go from 80 degrees to 30 degrees. So, this is my objective over here. So, what I am going to do is I am going to dip this copper ball inside the oil which is actually cold. So, this oil molecules are going to take away the heat from the copper ball and the copper ball temperature will gradually reduce. So, now what I am going to do is use this particular equation to figure out the rate at which heat loss is taking place inside the ball. So, let us say I will write this equation like this and let me put some numbers over here. So, in my example I have taken that the radius of this particular sphere, the copper ball, this radius from here to here r. So, this radius I have taken as 4 centimeters, which is approximately about, I can convert it into meters. So, 0.04 meter. I can calculate its surface area as well. So, that will turn out to be 4 pi r square and this will turn out to be 0.02 meters square. So, please double check if I have made any calculation error over here. Now, what will be the value of heat transfer coefficient? So, this is something that we will calculate in advanced classes in convective heat transfer, but over here I am going to assume some reasonable number. So, I am going to assume about 1000 watts per meter square for now, and these two temperature values I already know. So, 2 infinity is 30 degrees and Ts value is 80 degrees. So, what I can do is I can plug in all these values over here. So, let me do that. So, I have 1000 watts per meter square into area multiplied by temperature difference. So, I can do this calculation and try and figure out what I will get. Perhaps I will get something like 1000 watts, which is actually again a large number. So, this 1000 watt value tells us the rate at which initially the balls will lose its heat. So, initially when you look at the ball's temperature, as soon as it is plunged into the oil, the temperature of the ball starts going down. If we come back to the curve over here, in later lectures we will figure out it is this slope over here. So, you can see this particular slope which tells us how fast the ball is actually cooling. Now, if I draw the slope at different points after certain time, what we can see is that the slope is actually reduced after certain time. So, So, this is time A, this is time B, and at time C over here we can see that the slope is almost 0. So, what it is going to tell us is at time C the rate of heat transfer is very negligible, and I think that makes sense, because once the ball has actually cooled down, its temperature is very close to that of the temperature of the oil. It is no longer going to transfer any heat to the oil. Now, I will just make one or two remarks over here and try and figure out to move to the next topic, which is radiative heat transfer. Before that, I will just make a brief remark that convection we will study in later chapters is essentially classified into two different categories. One is the free convection, and this is also known as natural convection, and the other one is forced convection. Now, what is the difference between them? So, I will illustrate with a different color thing over here. If I want to cool the copper ball not in 100 seconds, but let us say in 10 seconds. So, I will illustrate that point. I have a copper ball that I want to cool very fast, because I want to do rapid quenching, and metallurgists do it all the time, because they have figured out that the grain boundaries, the grain structures, it actually is a function of how rapid the temperature dropped inside a particular material. So, over there, if you come back to the slide, what they are trying to do is essentially trying to achieve something like this. So, if you compare the previous three curves, this was the first curve, this is the second curve, and this is the third curve. What we are doing is we are going in a unique direction over here, and all this is summed by just one variable. We will say that H3 is greater than H2 greater than H1. And what is H? If I can go back to the previous slide, H is given over here, and it is defined as the convective heat transfer coefficient. Again, don't be alarmed if you are not able to follow this, because this today is just the first lecture. I am trying to present several topics just to illustrate a few points, and that point is very interesting over here. So, heat transfer engineer, by knowing or by controlling the value of H, he can determine what is the rate at which convective heat transfer takes place, and that can help many different other engineers like metallurgists, material science people, even electronics people, because they can figure out what is the rate at which the electronic component cooling is taking place. So, these are some of the points that I wanted to illustrate. Now, let me go to the third mode of heat transfer, which is very interesting. This is radiation heat transfer. In fact, radiation heat transfer is all across us, and this equation is given over here. You can see this equation again, because it is the rate of heat transfer, units will be watts, and it is named in the honor of Stephen and Boltzmann. So, it is known as the Stephan-Boltzmann law, and there are certain parameters over here that I will define. The sigma, which is the constant, is defined as this, and this is known as the Stephan-Boltzmann constant. This E type letter over here, epsilon, is called the emissivity. A is of course the surface area, Ts is the temperature of that particular surface which is losing heat, and T surrounding is the surrounding temperature which is gaining the heat. So, again over here very interesting things are happening, and historically there is very good precedence. Lot of people have worked in this area in physics. So, Stephan and Boltzmann and later on Planck worked on it, and there are one or two very good examples with which I can illustrate this particular point. So, what better example than to take the example of sun. So, we can all see the sun in summers. We are getting too much of sun because temperature is very high, so to speak metaphorically. So, this figure over here shows a picture of the sun, and we are all able to see sun with our eyes because it emits lot of energy. So, if I ask another question, over here is the equation by which we will calculate how much energy is actually emitted by the sun. So, this equation will help us understand that particular attribute. Now, another question we can ask is, do human beings also emit energy? So, if you look at this equation, which is proportional to t to the power 4, the answer should turn out to be yes, which means if I switch off all the lights in the room, that there is no extra light going on, then will somebody be able to see me just because the amount of energy that I am emitting? So, there are equipments. So, this is the question I asked over here. So, there are equipment which allow us to do that, but this is it requires equipment because we human beings, we emit in the infrared regime, where the wavelengths are actually very high. So, this is of the order of 1 micron to 10 micron wavelength, and you can see the scale over here, temperature scale, which is given approximately. So, in this illustrative figure, it is actually shown that this person we can see with the visible camera as well and with the IR camera as well. So, during the daytime, it does not make much sense to use the IR camera, but during the night time, especially for security purposes, for night surveillance, lot of security agencies like police and military, they actually make use of IR camera to figure out if some intruder is coming in the darkness. So, because it is dark, there is no reflected light coming from that person, so he is able to hide. But if the security person has the infrared camera available, then because of the emitted radiation coming from that body, because it has a certain temperature, that thing can still be visible even at night time. So, this was one just point I wanted to illustrate, that in certain ways we have certain thing common with sun, but of course, sun people can see with naked eye, but human beings we can't. The common thing between us is the temperature of sun is very high. So, what I want to do is plug in these values over here in this equation in order to figure out how much amount of energy sun is emitting, and believe me, the value is going to come very large, huge amount of wattage coming from the sun. And the first question which comes is, what is the temperature of the sun? So, if we go to the next slide, of course, engineers and physicists know the answer over here, but it is a very nice slide that illustrates this point. This is taken from the WMO website, the World Meteorological Organization, and it shows, as is shown in the title over here, it shows the extraterrestrial solar irradiance. So, this is again something that we will learn in more detail in the radiative heat transfer chapter, which will come later on. But just to generate some interest and to create some curiosity, I wanted to show this curve. So, what we are seeing is something called the irradiance on the y-axis. As you can see, the units are little complicated. It is watts per meter square per nanometer, or some people can also express it in this form, watts per meter square per micron. So, mu m stands for micron. So, that is the irradiance which is coming from the sun, and what is the x-axis over here is actually the wavelength, and this again wavelength is given in nanometers. I can also convert it into microns. So, I will ask a couple of questions over here. So, first question I ask is this spectrum which is shown over here. By the way, first I will explain why are there two spectrums shown in this particular slide. So, one is a very smooth dotted line that we can see over here, and it says this represents a theoretical curve for a black body which is at 5800 Kelvin. So, I will write it slightly bigger. So, one thing you can notice is when we were looking at conduction heat transfer, the temperatures that we were looking at, units were in degrees centigrade. So, we looked at the difference of 80 degrees minus 40 degrees, 40 degree minus 20 degrees. As soon as we jump into radiative heat transfer, we stopped using degree centigrade and then we moved into Kelvin. So, the main reason for that is that in radiative heat transfer, we are going to deal with temperature to the power 4 and their differences. So, if we have two temperatures which are to the power 4th, and this is surface temperature and this is surrounding temperature, here we will achieve very different values of this difference if we use centigrade or Kelvin. If for instance, we were just using Ts and T surrounding, even if I use 40 degrees minus 20 degree, I get the answer 20 degree, which is equivalent to 20 Kelvin as well. Or if I use a different color pen, I could have done the same thing. So 40 degrees is about 273 plus 40, which, if my math is correct, is about 313 Kelvin, and 20 degrees is 293 Kelvin. So even if I did this difference over here in Kelvin, what I'll get is 20 Kelvin. And these two values are same. So usually when we are doing conduction heat transfer or convection heat transfer, we can still, for the sake of uniformity, always use Kelvin, but we tend to use the most common units, which is degree centigrade. But when we are dealing with radiative heat transfer, there is no other option but to use the units of Kelvin. So over here, sun temperature we will never talk about in degree centigrade, we will always talk in Kelvins. So coming back to this particular curve, what we are seeing is this dotted smooth curve that we are seeing over here is a theoretical black body emission from any black body, and this solid line, the zigzag black line which we are seeing over here, this is the actual spectrum which is measured by this organization WMO, World Meteorological Organization, and this spectrum, they have used this word before it, extraterrestrial, which means it is outside the atmosphere. So if we are in the planet Earth over here, and we have a very thin atmosphere over here, so what this word essentially means is that we have to be outside the atmosphere, maybe at point A or point B, or even somewhere further at point C, and then if we do this measurement, then this zigzag black curve is something that we will observe. Let me erase some of this thing over here for clarity purposes. Now we see, by matching these two curves, that perhaps 5800 Kelvin is a very good match, because we see the dotted line and the solid line are very close to one another. So why did I spend a lot of time on this particular plot? Was just to illustrate this point. We don't have to go to sun to measure its temperature. From here itself, by looking at the solar irradiance value, we can approximately figure out what's the solar temperature. Now, having figured out the solar temperature, we go back to our very simple example, and essentially what we want to figure out is how many watts are being emitted from the sun. So again, it's a long calculation, and please recheck my calculation if I make any mistake or not. So just for simplicity, emissivity value we will take as 1 over here, because sun is close to a black body. Then we multiply it by the sigma value over here. So sigma is 5.67 into 10 to the power minus 8, and the units are important: watts per meter square, Kelvin 4. Now we need to multiply it by the area of the sun, multiplied by T to the power 4. So just for simplicity, because I was using a handheld calculator, I'll again approximate the solar temperature not just as 5800 Kelvin, but I'll just round it up and make it 6000 Kelvin. Now very quickly, let's calculate the area of the sun, which is essentially, if I assume it to be a perfect sphere, it's about 4 pi r square. So I looked up the value of r. So certain references give a very approximate value of r is about 7 lakh kilometers. So now I convert it into meters. So we get something like 7 into 10 to the power 8 meter. I plug that back in and I get the value of this pi into 7 into 10 to the power 8 whole square meter square. Please recheck this calculation, because I have just done it using a calculator. I might have made a mistake. So, but that exact value is not that important. The scale of the value is very important. So if you do this calculation and if it turns out to be correct, then what we get from sun is about, this is a huge number. I think I misspoke. We don't get it. This is how much energy is actually emitted by the sun. So huge amount of energy is emitted by the sun. By the time it reaches Earth, the flux of that particular energy actually comes down very low value. and during solar noon the value which people approximate is about 1000 watts per meter square, which is about, roughly speaking, 1 kilowatt per meter square. So, on a 1 meter square scale, if we are standing on top of the roof, we can assume about 1 kilowatt of energy is incident from the sun, but only at the solar noon. During the morning and the evening this value goes down. During solar noon this is the value that we get. So, again recheck this calculation. The numbers are by themselves not that important, it is the scale which is important, and it is the understanding of curves like this which is shown over here, and which we will do in much more detail in later on chapters. So, I think that brings us to the summary of this particular lecture. Let us summarize what we have learned today. So, today's lecture was about introduction of heat transfer, and we tried to look at certain applications of heat transfer. We looked at the modes of heat transfer, and I just introduced it with the help of certain solved examples. So, what I would suggest to the students is make some preparation for the next class. If it is possible, try to think of some problems in heat conduction. So, that is what we are going to study in next class. I will look at the one dimension heat conduction. I will also look at concepts that we couldn't go into more detail today, because today was just an introductory class. So, I will look in more detail about thermal conductivity. Then I like to ask lot of questions. So, I will ask or pose these questions to the students, that today we calculated the value of Q dot, all of them were coming out to be positive. The first value was about 2.7 kilowatt, then we got 1 kilowatt, and then we got a huge number, 10 to the power 34 watt. Is there some case in which it can be negative? So, think about that. And there is a correlated question, can we actually write the rate of heat transfer Q as a vector? Is it possible to write it with an arrow on top of it? And I also gave a tip over here is, heat transfer is an interesting subject, but it is very mathematical, and with any mathematical subject it is very important to try and solve as many problems from any standard textbook that you may be having. I think with that, let us conclude this lecture. Thank you very much.